All right, let's dive right into this explainer and completely shatter the illusion of the serene, marble-columned Athenian Golden Age. When we think of 5th century Athens, we usually picture this flawless era of calm philosophy and prosperity, right? Well, scratch that. We're going to reveal a society that was actually teetering on a high-stakes cultural fault line. This was a place where ancient, rigid traditions were colliding head-on with some of the most radical, destabilizing innovations in human history.
Just listen to this foreboding warning from Solon. He said, "I am well aware that the gods are envious of human success and prone to disrupt our affairs." That perfectly captures the terrifying, unpredictable nature of the Greek gods that ruled literally every single aspect of daily Athenian life. The Athenians didn't believe in a guaranteed paradise or perfectly loving deities. They believed that success itself could invite divine wrath, and that tension, it colored absolutely everything they did.
So, to understand this society on the edge, we're exploring 5 key pillars of 5th century Athens. 1. The Golden Age's hidden tensions. 2. Dealing with the gods. 3. Tragedy as civic education. 4. The paradox of Athenian women. And 5. Dangerous new ideas. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The Golden Age's hidden tensions. Let's see how this fantasy of a flawless, peaceful era unravels. There is a massive, stark contrast between our modern myth of a peaceful Athens and the gritty historical reality. Sure, you had magnificent architecture like the Parthenon and all this incredible wealth flowing in. But underneath that, this was a society wrestling with unprecedented, corrosive friction. You had new forms of education, shifting gender dynamics, and a looming conflict with Sparta that would push this friction to the absolute breaking point. It was really a high-stakes era defined by a very delicate balancing act.
Which brings us to Section 2, Dealing with the Gods. To truly understand Athens, you have to understand their incredibly strict relationship with the divine.
Okay, so the crucial thing to grasp here is that Greek religion wasn't about some internal moral compass or achieving a blissful afterlife. As this 7th century BC bronze statuette inscription from Manticlos so bluntly shows, it was a literal contractual transaction. I give you this gift for my share, Apollo, now you do something for me in return. It was an ongoing exchange of honors, sacrifices, and festivals to appease easily offended gods who demanded active physical worship in exchange for earthly favors.
Now, to understand why Athenians were so terrified of offending those gods, we have to talk about miasma. This wasn't just a metaphor, guys. It was viewed as a literal, contagious state of ritual pollution. If someone committed a major offense, like homicide, they generated this miasma. And if the community didn't immediately actively purify it, the gods wouldn't just punish the offender, they would strike the entire city-state with catastrophic punishments like bad harvests or epidemic disease. The stakes for strict religious conformity were literally communal survival.
To avoid that catastrophic pollution, they followed incredibly strict clinical procedures to keep the gods happy. Just look at how methodical and, honestly, almost chilling this required step-by-step process of animal sacrifice was. Every single detail mattered. You decorate the animal with garlands, you maintain strict silence so no impure words are spoken, you sprinkle water to induce consent from the animal, and then swiftly cut its throat and butcher it. It was a high-pressure performance where one slip-up could invite absolute disaster for everyone. Section 3. Tragedy as civic education. So, how did Athenians process all these intense societal fears?
Look at this rapid succession of groundbreaking plays during the mid-5th century. You've got the Oresteia in 458 BC, Ajax in the 440s, Antigone in 441, Medea in 431. But listen, these weren't just an excuse to eat snacks in an amphitheater. They were a vital civic education. They were publicly funded events where citizens, who, keep in mind, were also combat veterans and voters, watched characters fall into violent disaster. It was a crucial public forum for exploring the moral complexities and the bloody consequences of life in the polis.
What is absolutely fascinating to me is the contrast between the wild, chaotic themes of those plays and the rigid, uniform rules of the Dionysus drama competitions themselves. The state enforced complete uniformity. You were allowed exactly 3 male actors for all speaking roles, switching masks to play everyone, including the women. You had exactly 15 chorus members. Performances happened during the daytime in a massive outdoor 14,000-seat theater, relying on broad gestures and booming voices. It was a highly controlled environment used to explore entirely uncontrollable human emotions.
And the playwrights used this controlled space to push some serious boundaries. Euripides gave these ancient tensions a literal voice. Take Medea in 431 BC. She sharply criticizes the strict social code, saying, "I would much rather fight in the phalanx 3 times than give birth to a child only once." Through the mask of a male actor, Euripides was putting the immense burdens placed on citizen women right on center stage for the whole male-dominated city to confront.
That powerful quote leads us perfectly into Section 4, the paradox of Athenian women.
Notice the extreme juxtaposition between the different classes of women here. On one hand, you have wealthy citizen wives. They were highly restricted to the inner spaces of the home, primarily acting as guardians of legitimate heirs and property. But on the other hand, you have the Hetairai, or companions. These women were socially marginalized, yet paradoxically, because they operated outside the bounds of respectability, they were empowered with public freedom of speech and wielded massive influence over the most powerful men in the city. It's a crazy paradox.
Now, while women were excluded from politics, they were absolutely central to property laws. Women could technically control land through inheritance and dowries, but, and it's a big but, the entire legal system was engineered to keep that property securely controlled by men. Husbands had legal control to use the dowry for the household, which eventually became the inheritance of the woman's children. And get this, strict heiress laws dictated that women without brothers were forced to marry close male relatives just to ensure the estate stayed within the father's male lineage.
But wait, despite their absence from politics, Athenian women possessed immense, indispensable power. Privately, they managed the vast properties and households. Publicly, they controlled sacred religious rites. Remember how we said religion was a matter of state survival? Well, at the most important oracles in the Greek world, like Delphi and Dodona, women served as crucial priestesses. Their spiritual authority was unquestioned, making them vital to the functioning of the entire city.
All of these simmering societal, religious, and gender tensions finally boil over as we reach the turbulent 430s BC. Section 5, Dangerous New Ideas.
This brings us to the climax of our explainer, an intellectual revolution that terrified traditionally minded citizens. Suddenly you have sophists blowing into town, charging massive fees to teach the amoral skill of persuasive rhetoric. You have Anaxagoras claiming the sun was just a lump of flaming rock, not a divine god. Leucippus invents an atomic theory of invisible, randomly colliding particles. And Hippocrates shifts medicine away from magic toward empirical, clinical observation. It was a total paradigm shift.
The panic really centered around figures like the famous sophist Protagoras. He introduced the ultimate destabilizing idea with this quote, "Man is the measure of all things, of the things that they are, and of the things that they are not." He was introducing relative truth. He was suggesting that absolute divine reality didn't even exist. And you can imagine, this completely terrified the old guard. If there is no absolute truth, what happens to their strict religious laws?
You can see how this builds into a massive societal crisis. The whole debate boiled down to nomos, custom and law, versus physis, nature. Sophists taught that human institutions and laws were just arbitrary conventions, not immutable rules grounded in divine nature. And if they're just conventions, they can be broken. The entire shared value system of the polis, the very glue holding Athens together, was suddenly at risk of falling apart.
So I leave you with this final thought to ponder. As the threat of the Peloponnesian War loomed in the 430s BC, did these radical new ideas bring progress? Or did this arrogant friction fundamentally tear their society apart and invite the catastrophic wrath of the gods? That tension is the true legacy of the Athenian Golden Age. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history you think you know.